Sometimes it's better for me to just sit back, bite my tongue, and then in 4 years I'll be able to say what I want.
There has been a gradual institutionalization of this code of conduct, the effect of which is to prevent people from ventilating their views. Bright students won't put up with it.
Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith.
They stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber at Yale.
We disagree, we debate, and then at the end of the day, we remain friends.
Keep Yale out of politics and focused on education. Sign our petition today, calling on Yale to adopt institutional neutrality. Truth should be Yale's mission, not commenting on every political controversy of the day. Sign the petition at fightforyale.com/institutional neutrality. Welcome everyone to Pod and Man at Yale. Today I'm happy to welcome to the podcast Tori Cook, a sophomore and editor-in-chief of The Beacon, a Buckley student publication.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And happy to welcome back Claire Barragan-Bates, a junior.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us, guys. Today we're going to discuss the Yale Women's Center and some recent investigative work that Tori did for The Beacon, namely a piece called All Center, No Women, the breakdown of the Yale Women's Center. Encourage everyone listening to check it out. Tori, can you just walk us through your piece and what you were hoping to find?
Yeah, so when I first had the Women's Center brought to my attention, I was trying to look into kind of who the Women's Center is, what they do on campus, why they're doing what they do, and why it is that I kind of haven't seemed to have heard of them at all.
So why do you think it is that, you're a woman on campus and, you haven't heard of the Yale Women's Center, right? Essentially, this would have been something that, would have come across your desk, so to speak.
Yeah, you would think so, but the piece kind of brought this to light, was that they're really hard to get in contact with, by people who don't seem to align with perhaps their organizational agenda, which they seem to have a strong organizational agenda. They exist in one place, which is under extracurricular events as here is their name. You can click on their website, but their website takes you to a dead page where the domain has expired.
So one of the things the Women's Center has done recently, they got a little bit of press coverage, a little bit of flack for hosting a conference on pink washing in Palestine. So you mentioned, had you heard of any Yale Women's Center events before that? I
hadn't, no. I'm certain that people who are maybe more clued into the Women's Center definitely have, and I'm sure they have an active email list and that sort of thing. Again, it was hard for me to talk to them. They wouldn't talk to me. But the Pink Washings and Feminism Conference was really interesting, and the fact that it was kind of picked up everywhere was really just in protest, it seemed, rather than in terms of the Women's Center's, publicization of it, that there was kind of an outcry, and that's why everybody heard about it.
So I want to bring into Claire into the discussion at this point. She provided insight and commentary in the piece that Tori wrote. And Claire, you had actually previously been on the Yale Women's Center board, which Tori has apparently never heard of. How'd you find the thing, and how'd you get involved in the first place?
How I got involved in the first place was that they had a job posting for a board position that they needed to fill my freshman year. So I thought that I would just apply because it was a paid job, and I thought that it would just be a good fit.
They had paid positions?
Yeah.
Huh. Go figure.
It's through the Office of Gender and Campus Culture that they get paid.
I don't know if you know the answers, but is it normal for student groups to have paid positions?
No, because it's not supposed to be sort of seen as a student group. It's kind of like the equivalent of an affinity center that we have on campus that usually have staff that run it, except it's just run by students.
Mm-hmm. So you saw the job posting.
Yeah, I saw the job posting. I applied. I ended up getting the job. So my first year, I was the public relations coordinator. I agree with Tori's criticism of the lack of publicization of events. And I tried to fix that as much as I could when I was public relations coordinator, but my hands were tied in a lot of aspects because there were so many contentious relationships between the Women's Center and other groups that we could have formed symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationships with, but they refused to allow me to sort of extend those olive branches.
So yeah, you mentioned you mentioned in the piece, I just want to highlight one of the quotes you had in there. You you say you had talked about that with the board and you were quote unquote outvoted every time. And the understanding you had or the explanation you were given was that the board said they, quote, weren't comfortable partnering with organizations that furthered capitalistic ideals.
That is, in fact, the case. That's what I was told in my first year, the first time when I was public relations coordinator. But then the following year, I stepped into the position of board coordinator, and then I brought up the question again. And at this point, I had been in a position of a little bit more authority. I was the one that was running things, but obviously we had to, utilize the democratic process sort of thing to make decisions. I couldn't just unilaterally make these kinds of decisions. And I brought up the question again because it was really sort of at the front of my mind how beneficial it could be for the Women's Center and for us to be able to extend the olive branch to other individuals on campus, other groups on campus, specifically the Women's Network and the Women's Leadership Initiative. I wanted the Women's Center to form some sort of a partnership with those groups because not only does their mission seem to obviously and intuitively align with what you would expect the Women's Center to stand for, but they were also two of the groups on campus that have the highest enrollment rates of students. So we could have made a really big impact if we were to sort of partner with them and mutually benefit from that partnership. But I was again outvoted and told again that it was because they felt that the brand of feminism and the brand of I don't even know if I can say feminism anymore. Intersectionality, wokeism, something like that they wanted the Women's Center to promote had a Marxist bent to it. It wasn't just about furthering women in their career prospects. They were, in fact, against that, which is why they didn't want to partner with the Women's Network and Women's Leadership Initiative.
Did they use the word like Marxist? Would they say we are a Marxist organization or like say we have Marxist ideals?
Yes.
Oh, wow. It's like they weren't even like, oh, this is how we think about it. They were like, no, we are Marxist and that's what we do.
Yes. But those were the kinds of things that were said behind closed doors. And as you know now, I retired my position off the board about a year ago because I knew that there was nothing that I was going to be able to do to change it and to make it more sane and more of an actually helpful resource to women on campus.
So one more question for you, Claire, before we bring Tori back into the discussion, like look at the issue more broadly. How do you think the Women's Center got that way? Like moved from helping women to like supporting Marxism?
I think that the Women's Center has always been more of a left-leaning organization. Some of the first women that were admitted on Yale's campus at the time when Yale started to admit women to sort of integrate them into campus culture, create a community of those women, because at the time it was such a small cohort. Obviously, that cohort continued to grow and grow, and the Women's Center was supposed to be a central space on campus for these women to create community, because really at this time it was like a cohort of women stepping into quote unquote a man's world. And at the time that was true. And I suppose that by virtue of that, it was sort of a more, I don't want to say left-leaning, but it was definitely always a progressive organization. Now it's gotten to the point where I think the values have changed. It's become about pretty much anything except traditional feminism. I just think that it went too far in that progressive direction. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, when I heard Yale Women's Center, like when you talk about the first women coming to Yale's campus and them wanting an organization that helps support them on campus, support their needs, that makes a lot of sense. And I think most people, when they hear Yale Women's Center, think that's what the Yale Women's Center does. So, Tori, Claire, like, is there an organization that actually fills that role? Women's Leadership Initiative and the Women's Network. And sororities.
I'm not involved in any of those, but I did reach out to them to try and talk to them on the piece. And in my research and looking through them and what they do, I was very impressed with like the broad umbrella that they cover, and that they really do seem to do what their names imply, which was kind of one of my big issues with the Women's Center. When you hear that name, you should kind of know what it's doing and understand who the space is for.
So does it frustrate you guys, as Yale students, that there's an organization calling itself the Yale Women's Center that, as Tori mentioned, is all center and no women?
I love that title. And yes, it's frustrating.
I definitely agree with that. I'm quite frustrated at the idea that, the Women's Center is somewhere that I would expect to at least be able to find a place if I, so desired. And from trying to reach out to them, I didn't include this in my piece, but initially, as I reached out to them, they agreed to, they seemed kind of tolerably enthusiastic and said, yeah, we'll totally give you an interview and that sort of thing. And then I coordinated a time with them. And then the next day they got back to me and said, actually, I have office hours at that time, so I can't actually meet with you. Have a good day. Nothing more. And so then I tried to reach out again for another interview, and they transferred me to another person who handled their, public relations coordinating, that sort of thing. And then the day after that, the person came back to me and said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to deny your request for an interview. And then they ghosted me.
Oh, interesting. They wouldn't even talk to you at all.
They wouldn't talk to me at all. And I don't know. I had assumed that maybe they'd be a little bit more open to talking to a woman on campus. I would assume that would be something that they're interested in doing, but it didn't seem to be the case. And it very much frustrates me that Women's Center means only women of a particular bent in a very particular area with very particular ideology can find a place at the Women's Center. And yet it's supported by Yale funding and, like Claire mentioned, has paid board positions.
So wait, Claire, are all the board positions paid also?
Yes. And they also have paid staffer positions. So if I'm to estimate, I think they have anywhere from 15 to 20 paid positions.
Is that, you guys know if that's normal? Like, does the YPU have paid positions? My understanding is it's all volunteer.
No.
No, but I think that what's happened to the Women's Center has been a perversion of what it used to be and what it was supposed to be and what campus funding was originally allocated to support. It makes sense to me why things like La Casa or the NACC or the AACC has paid positions, because they have staff that run the place. They have students that are doing jobs to sort of bring in and promote the community that those spaces are intended to provide. And I think that that's what the Women's Center once did. I'm not sure that it's even really come to the university and the administration's attention that that's no longer what's happening, but it's quite sad.
So we're talking about the funding that Yale gives to Yale Women's Center. Does Yale have a responsibility to its student body, to its female student body in particular, to actually fund an organization that actually caters to them and caters to their needs?
Well, I would think so. Even just having an organization on campus that doesn't seem to be doing what it says that it's supposed to be doing, and then also stop saying what it's supposed to be doing, where you can't find it online, you have no idea what the Women's Center is supposed to be doing because they haven't put out emissions data anywhere, and their website is down and that sort of thing. I see that as intensely problematic in terms of a Yale funding standpoint.
The problem is that they're using university funding to fund a political agenda, which I think is just improper. On top of me not agreeing with what their political agenda is. Maybe this could have been avoided if there was actual paid staff that were not students that were in charge of the Women's Center. But I think the problem is that the Women's Center is completely student-led and student-run.
So moving to kind of the broader picture here, is this kind of, I guess, appropriation, for lack of a better word, of women's causes or women's concerns for other political issues? Is this something that you think is unique to Yale's campus? Is this something you see in other places? Is this something that's you've experienced outside of the Yale Women's Center?
I don't think that it's unique to Yale's campus. I've talked to friends at other universities who see similar things, perhaps not as exaggerated as this Women's Center example that we have, but I don't think as a phenomenon it's unique.
Do you guys think that, hypothetically, there would be a way for students to get involved in Yale Women's Center who have a different perspective, or is that kind of is there so much institutional capture that moving it away from Marxism wouldn't be possible at this point?
Well, the hiring is completely done by the student board. So if they knew you were conservative, I don't think they would hire you in the first place.
I know that they're being investigated right now. And I feel like that's where it would have to be, wherever the funding is coming from.
It's hard because the funding comes from the OGCC, which is also woke.
Well, I just want to thank you both for joining me on Pod and Men at Yale. Thank you, Tori, for your work, and thank you guys for your candid thoughts on this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Before we get to our interview with Independent Women's Forum Vice President Andrea Bottner, take a minute to send us your thoughts on the Yale Women's Center and how feminism is viewed in modern campus discourse. Reach us at info@buckleyinstitute.com. Just a quick note, this interview with Ms. Bottner was recorded back in April, so some of the more recent developments on campus aren't discussed. I'd like to welcome Andrea Bottner to the podcast. Bottner is the Vice President of External Relations at the Independent Women's Forum and the former Director of the International Women's Issues Office at the U.S. State Department. She also led the Justice Department's Office on Violence Against Women and served as the Justice Department's Principal Deputy Director. She served as a commissioner on the Maryland Commission on Women and has a long resume of accomplishments in public service. She's an expert on women's issues, and we're honored to have her on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm honored to be here. It's about as close as I'll ever get to an Ivy League institution. So you'll see.
Well, we'll get right into it. First thing I want to talk to you about is an issue that's very important to a lot of our Buckley fellows. It's about being a conservative woman on today's college campuses. So does being a conservative woman on campus, do you think it raises particular challenges with regards to being a part of the campus dialogue and discourse?
Oh, I absolutely do. And I would say this, I think being a conservative woman, whether you're on campus or you're out in the working world, in the political arena, dare I say, you're always playing defense in a way. And I think on a college campus, you're going to see that in a very dramatic, probably more hysterical way. But, as someone who is in the halls of the U.S. Congress often for work and sitting in hearings and listening to debates, sadly, we see the same kind of dynamic.
So what's your advice to conservative women on campus about speaking up, sharing their perspective, making sure they're heard?
My favorite professor was one of the most liberal, poli-sci, and that was my major, political science. And, Dr. Ken Campbell and I didn't see eye to eye on anything. But when I look back, it was my absolute favorite small class. I'm a senior, it was like 15, 20 of us. And he was so fantastic because everybody would argue, but you knew that you always were free to disagree.
Right.
Especially as you're older and you're on a college campus, you have to be able to fight and express what you believe. We depend on it. And when you go into the workforce and the marketplace, true leaders in successful companies, they want different views around the table. We need to be able to have 5 different ideas, come into a conference room.
So it's actually interesting. Buckley does an annual survey. We do an annual survey of college students across the country. Last year's survey, we actually found that self-identified conservative women were actually significantly less likely to self-censor because of their classmates than self-described liberal women were. They're also less likely to self-censor than conservative men were, weirdly. And I thought this might be the other way. College-age women, like you said, they're predominantly liberal-leaning, more so than men, especially if you look at recent trends. Why do you think it is that maybe conservative women actually have a little bit more willingness to put themselves out there on political issues than liberal women or conservative men even?
Well, we've seen, culturally, there are the majority on campus are women students. We've seen, I think, parity in medical school, and maybe more women than men in law school campuses. But that is interesting. I would not have thought that.
I was very surprised. I wanted to double check, and my thought was maybe it's like a through the rabbit hole thing. They're like, you're a conservative woman on a college campus, all the numbers are against you, and you're just like, you know what? I'll just kind of lean into that. That was my thought.
Yeah. And maybe, you look culturally too. We've seen more women in Congress, come into office. There are more Republican women. Just look at the news outlets. You see a lot of strong women hosts and voices out there. So maybe there's encouragement they're taking from that.
Well, hopefully. I mean, the more, we want all students of all perspectives to speak up, and conservatives tend to feel particularly alienated. So, if conservative women on campus can be leading the charge, then by all means.
Yes.
But I do want to turn now to the main topic of the episode, which is, how women are actually treated on campus. The focus of this episode is a new report about the Yale Women's Center. I mean, ostensibly, by the name, it's there to serve women. A story in the Beacon, a student newspaper that's affiliated with the Buckley Institute. It questions whether it really does serve women at all. It really, according to the report, seems to just function as like a organization dedicated to other political interests using the Women's Center name. So they talk about LGBTQ issues, opposition to oil companies, and they do pro-Palestinian advocacy. So this phenomenon of women's issues being captured, I guess, or laid aside in favor of other political causes, is this something you think is like a unique campus phenomenon, or is this something, we see more broadly across the country?
That I was reading this, and it's everywhere. So when I hear a group, like the Yale Women's Center, I would never think that I would be welcome there.
Oh, wow.
I just assume when I hear a women's center, the National Organization for Women, UN Women, unfortunately, women has become, for probably most, synonymous with a progressive left-leaning agenda.
So why do you think it is? Why that is? Like, why do you think something like the Women's Center, the Yale Women's Center, would kind of abandon advocating for women in favor of these other causes? Why does it happen on the national level that the women's vote or the women's issues are really boiled down to one thing, and then women's issues are then used to advocate for every other cause?
The women coming onto the scene with the abortion issue, right? So that was very much, we're fighting for, our bodies, our choice. In a way, they were fighting against, men telling them, right, what to do with their bodies. So they're an underdog, they're a bit of a victim in that situation. That has served them well over the years because it is one issue that most women, it's easy to be scared by. That particular issue of abortion, I think, really opened the door and then paved the way for the more progressive track that we've now seen most women's, I'm putting in quotes, women's activists embrace. I mean, just reading through, the article in the Beacon and looking, especially I'd written something about what happened on October 7th. You take politics out of it. What happened on October 7th was that was brutal, sadistic murder. Rape was used as a weapon of war. That should not have any sort of political attachment. But all of our big women's groups whose missions are there, UN Women is there to fight against, rape being used as a weapon of war. They had nothing to say. And I mean, it's egregious. The silence was deafening. And so many of our Democrat progressive elected leaders, they had no comment. And I think I even referenced, Michelle Obama could not stop talking about in 2014, when the girls in Nigeria were taken, she's on social media, bring back our girls. A huge part of her platform was about defending women and families, and politics has won out. And, that's international, but the Yale Women's Center, I mean, it should be a place where a Republican conservative and a progressive Democratic women can go in together and, maybe get what they might need as far as products or advice or a place to go and have a cup of coffee, and maybe talk something non-political. Campuses all over have shut down, conservative women speakers and in the name of what? Of politics.
And so you mentioned, and I was going to ask, you mentioned that you hear Yale Women's Center, you feel you wouldn't be welcome from the get-go. Why is it that you hear Yale Women's Center and that that's not a place for a conservative woman to go?
When you've been around and you've seen so many groups who, again, like National Organization for Women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Recently in the international space, UN women. I mean, they have women in the title and they want nothing to do with conservative principles, conservative women. You get used to it. I mean, I hate to say it.
And we're at the 6-month anniversary was yesterday of October 7th. It's been 6 months. And you mentioned UN Women. And I remember it must have been 2 months probably after October 7th. They were getting a lot of criticism on social media for not having commented at all on what had happened on October 7th. They put out a tweet that referenced it, I think, and deleted it shortly after. And then there's been nothing since.
Oh, well, and I have to interject here because there are some women's groups, and one of them is Independent Women's Forum. I think we sent a letter in December saying, and signed by many other more, I'd say honest and true women's advocates, groups like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the AHA Foundation, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance, some of these groups, MALA, the Clarity Coalition, and we sent a letter and we said, why isn't there anything being said? This is ridiculous. It's 6 weeks later, it's 7 weeks later, it's 8 weeks later. And I believe it was the Friday of that week. They put up a very milquetoast statement that you never really saw again. And we still heard nothing from the White House. We sent the same letter to the Gender Policy Council, whose mission is to watch that for rape being used as a weapon of war. Not a word to this day.
It's absolutely terrible. So one of the other prevalent political debates of the day surrounding women and women's rights is obviously the tension between women's rights and transgender rights. Some women's rights activists, prominent among them being J.K. Rowling, probably the most famous, and swimmer Riley Gaines, they're raising concerns about how men identifying as women can undermine or impede women's ability to succeed, in sports, sometimes even in prisons, the rights for women's safety and security there. What are your thoughts on this issue more generally, and how universities on the one hand and politicians on the other are addressing it or not?
Time and time again, the American public has said over, I want to say 78% have said men should compete in men's sports, women should compete in women's sports.
And it's actually interesting. You mentioned surveys supporting it. That was even true of college students, which I was surprised. When we did our national college student survey in fall of last year, it's actually almost 2-to-1. People, college students believed, it's an issue, transgender individuals should have, all the rights as everyone else, but it's an issue of fairness and people should only be able to compete along the lines of biological sex. So even a group that we mentioned is, trends fairly liberal and fairly progressive still sees, the important fairness part of that equation.
That's right.
And so I do want to kind of move to another part of this, because an important part of this is obviously the definition of what a woman is or what women are. Something that, really came to the forefront during the Supreme Court nomination hearings for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. When she was asked, what is a woman? She said, she refused to answer the question. So for someone for the Yale Women's Center, for example, what should woman mean?
Well, a woman is someone who is born a biological female.
It shouldn't be that hard.
That's not controllable. You're born one or the other, right? Past that point, if one or the other wants to live their life in a different way, by all means, go through a transition. My problem, though, is when that person tries to come in and compete or make a female, say, uncomfortable. I frankly, dare I say, more government funding, but I look at this and I think no one wants to hurt. I don't. The people I work with don't want to hurt a transgendered individual. I'd say, great, have a man, a woman, and a third team. I'm not anti-trans. I'm pro-woman. And how have we gotten to this place where if you say, I believe women deserve a fair playing field and to compete with other women, period, you are immediately labeled as a horrible transphobe, an evil person. You might be threatened, you lose a job, you get canceled. And it's like, no, I'm just pro-woman. We fought too hard. That's what Title IX was about, to recognize differences and give women a chance to compete and have scholarships. I can get back to you on the number. I want to say 500 plus, it might be 600 scholarships that have been lost in recent years by women because of the entering into the competition by men.
Oh, wow.
So women are losing scholarship opportunities. They're getting hurt. In Riley Gaines's case, she tied Leah Thomas, and for political reasons, they said, you don't hold the trophy, Leah will hold the trophy. Why?
So what advice do you have for women on campus who feel the way you do? And even, center left women who, again, support trans rights just like you do, but feel, I guess, uncomfortable or worried or scared of speaking out on this issue on behalf of women as they see them.
I think if you're on campus, right, maybe we all feel better when we've got friends with us, right? Stand with your friends. So maybe there's something, a letter could be sent, and the tone of the letter matters. We're concerned about women's opportunity and fairness in play. We want to make sure that women are competing, with women so that they're not hurt and they're not, at risk of losing an opportunity. And maybe you get 100 students to sign it. We have petitions running all the time, IWF.org. You can go on, you can check out a petition, and it can ask you where you're from, and you can sign here to protect women's sports. I will say there's a new venture on the market. A woman named Jennifer Say recently launched XXXY Athletics. And basically, it's a great athletic wear brand, but it's cause driven. It's all about protecting women in sports. And it's a cool website. It's, thetruthfits.com.
That's great.
If you want, become an activist and, educate yourself too. And, take advantage of the Ivy League education while you're on campus and make yourself heard.
Amazing. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Andrea Bottner, again, thank you so much for joining us on Pod and Man at Yale.
Well, it's my honor, and thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for tuning in for another great episode of Pod and Man at Yale. Leave a review on your favorite platform and send us your thoughts at info@buckleyinstitute.com. And always remember, for God, for country, for Yale, in that order.